Hello and welcome to my Death Knight How to Play guide. This is relevant for Mists of Pandaria patch 5.4, the Siege of Orgrimmar patch, and I assume I'll still be playing in Warlords and shall update as necessary. So, Death Knights. What is a Death Knight? A Death Knight is a plate-clad warrior of the Scourge with various Runeblade abilities and spell effects. Now, what a Runeblade is simply any weapon that you're able to equip, and it has a rune attached to it. A rune can be found in your rune forging section, and they are of various types, 90% of which are actually useless. In every circumstance, as a DPS Death Knight, in this current patch, you want the rune of the Fallen Crusader. There is nothing that compares to it. If you are dual wielding, you want to have the rune of the Fallen Crusader, and you also want the Razor Ice on your main hand or off hand, whichever you feel is more relevant. This makes it do a bit extra damage on each attack and causes a debuff on your target, making them take increased frost damage. As tank, you want to be alternating between the sword shattering, spell breaking, or the stone skin gargoyle, depending on the fight. To make a rune, you need to go up to a rune forge. Simply select the rune that you wish to use and then click on your weapon. So, with that out of the way, fundamentally a Death Knight, the most basic thing that you need to know is you use your diseases on the target and then you just smash them. Diseases, they are two types, Frost Fever and Blood Plague. There are various ways to apply these two different diseases, and you can find them on the tooltips of your spells and abilities. The quickest way to do it is with Outbreak, and that just instantly applies as so. And then you can see damage starting to tick. Depending on your speciality, the Blood Plague or the Frost Fever will do more damage regarding the mastery because of shadow and frost damage. Once the diseases are on the target, you have various abilities which will be buffed by the presence of the diseases. Festering Strike for Unholy doesn't actually gain any buffs, but it extends the duration of the diseases. Scared Strike gains an additional 25% damage for each disease, and then applies it as shadow damage. And as Frost, Obliterate benefits from it. And then you have the spell-based effects which use your runic power, which are Frost Strike and Death Coil. Now, regarding the rune and the runic power system, you have 2 Frost, 2 Unholy, and 2 Blood runes, and these are fueling your abilities. For example, Scared Strike takes 1 Unholy rune, and Festering Strike takes 1 Blood and 1 Frost. Other things, like for Frost, Obliterate takes 1 Unholy, 1 Frost, and then your 2 runic power abilities, Death Coil and Frost Strike, deplete your runic power, which you actually gain by using your runes. If I just apply my diseases once again, a couple of Festering Strikes increase the duration, a couple of Scared Strikes just to do that, and you can see I've gained 60 runic power by using that, and then I can spend them on Death Coils as I gain more runic power throughout. So as Unholy, you want to be having your Ghoul out, which I currently don't. There he is. And then you use your abilities like I just described. Whenever you get 2 green outlines on either side, which I'll gain in a few moments because it's a proc, you will gain the ability to cast a Death Coil free of charge. Come on. I think it's a 15% chance. There it is. And then once these 2 things are on the side, you can cast a free Death Coil. So I'll just put my Ghoul on assist, and then he can carry on attacking this thing too. Now, you will gain Death Runes after certain abilities. These are these purple ones here. And Death Runes count as any type of rune. You can use them on anything. As Unholy, you always want to be using them on Scared Strike, or in AoE situations on Blood Boil. So, since we've got 3 of these Death Runes, we can use 2 Scared Strikes with the Unholy runes, and then we've got 3 Death Runes, so we can use 3 Scared Strikes in addition to those. And then once the Death Runes have been used, you will be able to just have them recharge and set to their normal way. Once you have used 5 death coils, you will gain Shadow Infusion 5 stacks, which triggers this other proc at the top here. This will transform your ghoul into an abomination type thing over here. When he's in this form, he gains cleave damage and just more damage in general, so whenever you see that proc, you always want to use it. Your main cooldowns as Unholy, there are 2 of them currently, are Unholy Frenzy, which increases your haste and also affects your rune regeneration, and your Gargoyle. It's best to use Unholy Frenzy first so that the Gargoyle gains the benefit of the buff, and then you can summon the Gargoyle in, and I'll just pull my ghoul back over here so you can see the Gargoyle doing his damage. The Gargoyle does plague damage, which is a combination of nature and shadow. So, as you can see, it hits quite hard, 107,000 in my current gear, without a crit. So, that is the basics of Unholy. Always transform your ghoul when it's an option, always use your death runes, always use your Festering Strikes to extend the disease duration, and to turn them into death runes. What else about Unholy? I can't exactly think of anything much, so we shall just bring our ghoul back and we shall go into Frost spec. The other DPS spec of Death Knights. They play in Frost Presence. Every spec plays in their relevant colour of presence. Frost doesn't have a ghoul. Well, actually it does, but it's a cooldown. It's not a passive pet. Now, something about Frost and the way it works is a little different. So if I just Howling Blast this and apply the disease, you can see the disease is ticking away at 13,000 non-crit, and will continue to do that for the duration. Blood Plague, which is applied by Plague Strike in this case, also ticks, but it does a little less damage because Mastery scales Frost damage up in the Frost spec. Frost, as its runes, starts with 2 death runes by default. It doesn't ever have blood runes, and this comes in very useful in every circumstance because it means you never have any downtime waiting for death runes to recharge. You can always use your main attack, which will be Obliterate. Obliterate as 2-hand Frost is a very high damage single target attack. As you can see if I just hover over the tooltip, 455% weapon damage and an additional 12.5% per disease, so it is a heavy attack. Frost is actually my preferred spec in PVE, and its cooldown, only one of them in this case, is Pillar of Frost. Increases your strength by 20%, and it's only a 1-minute cooldown. I actually have it as 41 seconds, but that's because I've got a trinket that alters that. So you can use this very frequently. And because the duration of Outbreak is also 1 minute, it means that you can do superpowered diseases every 1 minute. So if I just reapply the Frost Fever again, as you can see, it's ticking for 13,000. If we then use Pillar of Frost, and then reapply the Frost Fever, you can see it's now ticking for 26,000. So whenever you have Pillar of Frost available, you want to reapply your diseases, because it will double the damage, which is quite important. Also, when Pillar of Frost is active, you want to summon your ghoul, which is a cooldown in this case. You don't have direct control over it, but it will go and do its own thing. So if I just attack that, the ghoul will then follow and do its attacks. And because of Pillar of Frost being active before that, the ghoul is a little stronger. So those are the main cooldown and sort of a supplementary cooldown for Frost. Regarding the actual rotation, you want to put your diseases on and Obliterate to your heart's content. Now, regarding the procs, this one at the top, this is called Rhyme, and it procs off Obliterates. I think it's a 45% chance, and it makes your next Howling Blast free of charge. So whenever you get that, you instantly Howling Blast, or if you're trying to avoid the AoE damage, you can use it on Icy Touch. The ones at the side here, this is the Killing Machine proc, and it makes your next Frost Strike or Obliterate an instant crit. Like so, and that was actually a little less damage because my Blood Plague has fallen off. And that triggered another Rhyme proc, so I can use a free Howling Blast. So it synergizes quite well with constant damage in this sort of situation. I'll just reapply that Blood Plague. Now, in Frost Presence as Frost, Your Frost Strike ability, which I just used there, a little less damage because I'm two-handed, only costs 20 runic power, so you can actually get 5 Frost Strikes out of a full stack, as it were. So there's an Obliterate used on the Killing Machine proc. Let's use another one, and another one. So it flows quite nicely, this spec. Now, there's 2 different styles of playing Frost. There is two-hand and dual wield. I'm currently two-hand, which means all my attacks and my obliterates do additional damage. So whenever you see a Killer Machine proc, you want to use it on obliterate if possible. And if you are on full runic power, this goes for Unholy as well, you want to use your runic power ability because you never want to cap it out. So since I was on 100 there, I'll just spend them all on my Frost Strikes, and then I'm down to the bottom again, and I can just carry on obliterating. In AoE situations, both specs want to use Death and Decay, which is a 30-second cooldown and lasts for 10 seconds. This costs 1 Unholy Rune. As Unholy, you want to use in Blood Boil, which targets everything and does additional damage for things afflicted with a disease. As Frost, you never use Blood Boil, you use everything on Howling Blast until you run out of Frost Runes, at which point you've got your Death and Decay to use. And if you have that spare Unholy Rune, which I do here, you can use it on Obliterate just to use the rune up, and you might actually get a Rhyme proc as well. So that's AoE. Now, what else? Yes, dual wield. Now, dual wield is a little different. Let's see if I actually have some one-handers. I don't appear to. Well, that's not a problem. So, dual wield, I can show in the thing over here. Let's go to the end. Dual wield gets Threat of Thessarian. As just hover there over this tooltip. When dual wielding, your Death Strikes, Obliterates, Plague Strikes and Frost Strikes, which is basically all of your abilities which you use as Frost, do additional damage with your offhand weapon, as opposed to just the main hand. And your Frost Strike damage is increased by 50%. Now what this means is that Frost, when dual wielding, gains massive Frost damage buff when dual wielding. So you want to prioritise your killing machines instead of Obliterate on Frost Strike. When two-handed, you obliterate on the killing machines instead. Now that is the main difference, but because Frost Strike is so much more powerful as dual wield, it's a lot better to spec Mastery to buff this damage even further. As two-hand, Mastery is still a great stat, but it's less beneficial. When dual wielding, your rotation is slightly altered, and it's actually very spammy. It's very strange. You want to use your Unholy Runes, when possible, on Death and Decay, as a standard rotation, single target or otherwise. You use your Frost Runes and Death Runes on Howling Blast, because you're speccing into Mastery. Howling Blast does frost damage and it buffs it further. And when you have your spare Unholy Rune, you can use it on Obliterate, or if you're really trying to min-max things, you can just leave it there sitting still and use the Runic Empowerment ability. I prefer not to do this personally. So this, what I'm about to do, even though I'm two-handed, is look something what dual wield rotation looks like. So you get your diseases up first thing, Killing Machine procs on there, so just spam Howling Blast constantly and use Frost Strikes on your Killing Machine procs. It's very... I don't like it, if I'm honest, even though the damage is arguably better. So yeah, that's dual wield. As far as talents go, the talents are a very sort of personal choice. I prefer Unholy Blight because of the way diseases get buffed by Pillar of Frost, but Plague Leech is actually a very good ability too. The only one that I'd say is critical is level 75, which is Blood Tap. Blood Tap, in my experience, is by far and away the best choice for DPS increase. Whenever you use your Frost Strikes or Death Coils, you gain some stacks of stuff. I'll just quickly get a load of runic power. Now I've got my power auras to display this thing here, where it says number 6. I explained this in a previous video as well. And that keeps track of my blood taps. Now, when you get 5, you can activate a blood tap, which I shall just burn my runes to demonstrate it. So now I've got no runes on cooldown. If I press blood tap, I instantly gain a death rune, and then I can carry on in my rotation. It's very simple and very useful for making sure that there's no dead time. Also, when you do have dead time, you should use Horn of Winter, because it does grant some runic power. Now, the last spec will be blood, and I don't currently have a blood spec. However, I can easily talk about it, because it is also fairly simple. Now, blood is obviously the tanking spec of the Death Knight. Again, it wants to apply its diseases, and its priority attack is Death Strike, because that heals you, and it gives you your mastery effect, which is a blood shield, which absorbs all incoming damage up to the limit of the amount that you healed, which is further buffed by your mastery. Filler attacks will be Rune Strike for your runic power, and if you are unable to Death Strike, you can use Blood Boil, which is an AoE ability, and if you are taking Roiling Blood, which as blood you should, it also triggers Pestilence. This will mean that everybody around will have each disease on them. They'll take additional damage from Blood Boil's actual attack, and because of Blood Spec abilities, you will refresh the diseases. So once your diseases are on, you should never really have to reapply them. And the final ability is Heart Strike, which costs 1 blood, and it is a cleave attack. So those are the 3, well 4 including the runic power ability Rune Strike, main abilities that blood will use. You have cooldowns in Vampiric Blood, which increases healing taken. You have a Rune Tap, which is a little self-heal in addition to your Death Strikes. You have Dancing Rune Weapon, which increases your parry. And then as all specs go, you have obviously your Icebound Fortitude and your Anti-Magic Shell. You also have, all across all specs, Empower Rune Weapon, which instantly refreshes all your runes, which is very nice. And of course, Army of the Dead. Army of the Dead is something that you should use on pre-pulls in almost all circumstances, and there are a few situations where you want to save it, except maybe if you're tanking, because it is actually a tanky kind of cooldown. You take less damage while you're channeling in it for 4 seconds. And on a fight such as Galakras, it's not worth using Army of the Dead until that dragon actually lands. Now, that is about everything regarding a Death Knight. I'm sure I may have missed something out, and if I have, then I shall probably just stick it in the description. Actually, I have missed something out, which is glyphs. Now, the Death Knight's glyphs are utter shit, right across the board. Thankfully, this will change in Warlords. The ones I have currently, Anti-Magic Shell, another Anti-Magic Shell, and Loud Horn. These are the ones that you want to be taking as Frost. As Unholy, you should probably be taking Unholy Frenzy, because Unholy Frenzy actually does damage to yourself, so you can use this glyph to stop that damage happening. And as Blood, you want to be using Vampiric Blood, because then you take absolutely massive amounts of self-healing as opposed to having the Last Stand effect, which is just outright better. Other things, I'm not talking about PvP here. Death Knight glyphs are just PvE wise utter shit. Those ones that I've just mentioned are the only ones worth taking. Resilient Grip is a PvP one. You should probably use Tranquil Grip. Path of Frost is nice just to reduce fall damage, and Long Winter is just nice to have it last an hour so that you just don't have to worry about refreshing it as often, even though you should be using it on cooldown in dead time. So that is how to play Death Knight in all 3 specs. I hope it wasn't a bit too rushed. I wanted to try and keep the video as short as possible, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment and I shall respond in kind and try and advise further. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.